All right, everybody. Welcome to this. Is not the final meeting, but this is the final section of the cards to go through. I want to make a brief announcement before we get started that I do have a date on the arrival of the PGM tarot printing and the printing of the book that goes with the tarot, and that is, you know, fingers crossed, is actually happening. It's a little later than I was expecting, but it's September. It's January 26th. So hopefully I will have them on that day, and there won't be any, you know, customs issues or anything like that. And I will in the days between now and then, I'm gonna get together all the packages that I can. Unfortunately, I'm still waiting on a few of the other things that go along with it. The new Hermetics tarot is being printed by another company, as are the add-on cards, both of the different versions of add-on cards, as is the Hecate triangle kit. I have the crystal balls that go in that kit. I've got all of them sitting in the storage unit, but the actual kit has not arrived yet. So unfortunately, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place with those things. I'm going to take a look at what the loss is going to be on doing just shipping the cards out to people who've made large contributions. I may do that. I have to see how much it's going to cost to ship them and how much it's going to then cost to ship the add-ons. And if it's not, you know, thousands of dollars, I will probably go ahead and do that, at least in some of the cases. Particularly if you were an earlier supporter in this and have been waiting literally for so very long for these things. But anyway, let's the other announcement is that I'm pretty sure we've been starting to work on it a little bit. I'm pretty sure that the next thing that I'm going to do after this is that my daughter and I don't know if you know, but she's a musician and has been writing tons of songs. My daughter and I are actually going to be writing a piece based on Greek mythology, an album of some sort based on Greek mythology, and I'm not going to say anything more about it, but it should be very magical and very mystical, as well as cool and fun. So look out for that project coming up in the future. But so let's talk about the suit of swords. It's the last suit, and in reading tarot, it is the suit that more often than not contains cards that are a little less pleasant. So this particular suit has the least pleasant cards in it. Let me see if there's any more people in the waiting room. Oops. One more person, I'm letting them in. So, you know, this suit I saved for last because it's, you know, a little bit of a downer in comparison with some of the other ones. But not all of the cards are bad, and there are multiple ways of interpreting all of the cards. So, you know, there are situations in which all but a few of them might not necessarily be completely bad. I don't know why that person's not coming in, but anyway. So the ace of swords, which, as I mentioned before, the aces all represent sort of the beginning of things, the monad, the starting point, the singularity. And in this case, I used one of the few references. There's maybe 2 or 3 references to swords in the Greek magical papyri in general. One mention is in a spell to have sort of a daemon come to you and do whatever terrible things you have in mind for them, and there's a sword involved in that ritual. But this is actually something called the Sword of Dardanos, which may or may not actually have anything to do with a sword. It's a spell that has multiple components in it, and one of them is called a sword, and it's a talisman that has a number of angelic names on it, and you probably can't see it, but they're actually on this particular sword. And it may be that it was intended that it should be a sword-shaped talisman, or it may just be that they were using colorful language for a strip of metal that you would engrave it in. But there are a number of talismans that date to roughly that time period from Jewish magical tradition, and that have angelic names similar to this, that are actually carved in the shape of a sword. So that may have been the author's intention, but we don't really know, obviously, for sure on that subject. But so the center part is that sword described, And then on either side of it, there are figures. There's Aphrodite and a couple of different versions of Eros and Psyche. And the spell actually begins with you carving those images into a magnetic stone. Obviously, I can put a magnetic stone on the card itself, and so I just decided to make it a little bit of a montage of the imagery from it. So it's a new talisman, but ultimately it has the same sort of intention as the original. So you can utilize it in a similar way, or you can use it as the Ace of Swords. And when I'm interpreting the Ace of Swords, I generally interpret it as with the Ace of Wands, you are being sort of given a gift from the universe, a direction to go in, a new will, a new pathway. Whereas the Ace of Swords represents more you taking initiative to begin something new yourself from your own will, from your own inner resources, not being guided by the universe, but by taking control of things for yourself. And so in some ways, the Ace of Swords, the Sword of Dardanos fits with that, because it's a love spell in which you're intending to influence someone to submit to your will. So there's a kind of a connection there. Oh, I'm just seeing myself in the background. I forgot to mention that this is my new background here. This is based on the New Hermetics Inner Temple, but with some of the imagery from the Greek magical papyri in it. So this is the air wall, the eastern air wall, and the southern fire wall of the Inner Temple. And this is going to be my backdrop for doing the next round of Inside the Magic Circle interviews, which I already have several people that are either interested in doing it or lined up to do it. So that will be coming back soon. So that's the Ace. The two, it has the twos generally represent the connection between two things. Either they're coming together, or they're moving in tandem, or they're going apart. And this is the moving apart kind of version of that. In the Rider-Waite deck, I brought out the deck last week and showed you guys examples, and I didn't bring it along this time. But in the Rider-Waite deck, this is the card that has a woman who's holding two swords, and she's blindfolded, and there's sort of a watery background behind her. And it's called the Lord of Peace in the Golden Dawn system. And Crowley's version of it, which I was showing last week as well, shows two swords crossed with each other with a flower. It's sort of I think it's somewhere between a lotus and a Tudor rose. So it's that both of those are representing sort of peaceful conditions in one way or another, but not necessarily the most comfortable. Whereas I've kind of gone in a different direction with this, where the two guys with swords, they're not necessarily fighting with each other, but they're definitely not in friendship. So if there's peace, it's sort of an awkward peace, and the talisman that's connected with it is related to a spell that's a separation spell for pulling a couple apart, basically, so that you can move in on whichever one of them you're interested in. A very popular kind of spell in modern hoodoo magic and that sort of folk magic. That this is a very ancient example, and there's a few different versions of the spell. They're very similar to one another. This is the only one that has this particular image in it. It's from actually the PGM, the Demotic magical papyri, but still in Greek, the bottom part. So anyway, that's the twos, and the part from the Homer Oracle is take heart, let these matters not trouble your thoughts. So that's the Two of Swords. I also want to mention the sword suit is a little bit of an interesting thing in this particular deck, because the ancient pottery that I'm based these images around has very few images of swords. I was only able to find maybe 5 or so, and I'm sure there's more, but most of the warriors on the pottery have spears instead. But I didn't want to make the swords suit spears, because it felt too similar to the wands, because the wands in the deck are just sort of rods in general. So it seemed like it would be somewhat confusing if there were two that were so similar to one another. So I went with swords, which, again, it is a kind of a Greek sword that I used. It's a little bigger than it would normally be, but the Greek sort of short sword is what the swords in the deck are based upon. So which there are images of, as I said, around. It's just not the common thing. So this is probably the most sort of imaginative suit of the card. So this is the Three of Swords. So the Three of Swords, the Crowley deck and the Rider-Waite deck, it's sort of a mean looking card, and I've done so here as well. It's very direct. Again, the idea of three contains the concept of either sort of synergy coming between things, or in this case, two against one, creating a dominant situation. And so we see the two warriors like completely. I don't know if you see them. They're stabbing the other warrior right through the chest. Which again is sort of an homage to the Three of Swords in the Rider-Waite deck, which has three swords going in through a heart. The talisman at the top is a talisman for domination and sort of mastering. It's one that you actually put into a river or bury, and in either case you can attach a string to it so you can retrieve it again and undo the spell when you're done, which is kind of a fun, interesting idea that you could apply to other spells too. The Four of Swords shows four warriors kind of coming together, and this is one of the more benign of the swords cards. It shows the people sort of coming to a compact with one another. It's not necessarily a peaceful compact. They're all still armed, but they're agreeing to work together or to just be in somewhat harmony with each other. And the talisman is a talisman for restraining anger and dominating persons. A lot of these ones are pretty much dominating, but this one's particularly removing anger from the situation. So it seemed appropriate, for instance, they are having a powwow there in the middle. And the versicle, oh, I didn't mention the Homer Oracle for the Three of Swords, which is for mighty Heracles, not even he escaped his doom. So, and for the four, it is come now, let us make these concessions to one another. So again, emphasizing the idea of sort of treaty with one another, not necessarily a happy agreement, but one in which you're settling the thing so that it works out okay. The Five of Swords. Now the fives all represent sort of like high energy situations. High energy situations with swords in your hand, that's going to be very dangerous. So the Five of Swords represents sort of a fellow kind of in peril and he's lost his sword, and other warriors are around him, possibly going to do him harm. The talisman again is a dominating talisman. This one has a Typhonian, the little barbarous names that are on it are Typhonian. You recognize them if you're familiar with those, Eo, Erebath, Eo, Pakrabath, etc., and so on. And the Homer Oracle is being struck by the sword, and the water was becoming red with blood. So this is a very sort of aggressive kind of dominating card. The Six of Swords, it shows the six warriors have kind of got their swords crossed. They are perhaps fighting, but it almost seems more like they're either doing some sort of an ornamental fighting, or they're doing some sort of a salute to one another. And they're, it's not as violent seeming as perhaps some of the other ones. And the Six of Swords generally, for me, when I'm doing a reading, it represents kind of things becoming organized in a way that allows you to understand them and to have them harmonious with one another. In the Rider-Waite deck, it's the one that has there's a boat, and there's a sort of a couple people huddled in the boat and someone guiding it across water. And the Crowley version shows something somewhat more similar to this, with just sort of harmonious swords interlocked with one another. The talisman on this is a talisman. It's one of the strange talismans that have sort of a funny demonic looking figure on it. And this particular one is for both restraining anger, dominating your enemy, but also gaining favor. So it has a little bit more of a positive feeling to it. But you can also use it to make friends as well. As you dominate your friends and then they like you better. The Home Oracle is act in whatever way your mind is moved and no longer hold back. The Seven of Swords. This shows some warriors really pretty heavily dominating one. I mentioned before that the sevens represent ambiguous situations. This one seems to be ambiguous, and yet likely the outcome is going to be bad for the person who's being attacked. Again, the talisman is another one of those ones that has the little demon guys on it, and this one it's got that Typhonian kind of barbarous names on it as well. It's a dominating spell. The Home Oracle is, but Zeus causes men's prowess to wax or to wane. The Eight of Swords, again, this is one of the rare ones that this is not actually a Greek magical papyri spell, but it's based upon one of the magical gems from late antiquity. This is a very cool gem that shows a number of interesting figures around an ibis, and those figures are actually the figures that are described in, I think it's PGM 195 or something like that. That it's a Helios or Apollo, or it's one of those ambiguous invocations, but the four directions are described as being four forms of Helios, and these are the four. This gem happens to be carved with those very four forms that are discussed, which are in the east, you're a dragon, in the south you're a falcon, in the west you're a crocodile, and in the north you're a babe rising lotus, Harpocrates. And so it's actually not in that order. I think it starts with the north in the spell, but so this is an interesting one that sort of incorporates imagery that's from the Greek magical papyri while not being directly connected with it. The Eight of Swords shows 8 warriors walking very closely in lockstep, but one of them kind of looking in a different direction. And this particular card, to me, when I'm doing a reading, usually represents people being stuck in a pattern in their lives and wanting to shift into a new direction, but not really knowing how, and kind of sort of like a circular thing. So this kind of represents, some sort of being unsatisfied with the direction that they're moving right now. And the Home Oracle is, get out of the gateway, old man, or soon you will be dragged out by the foot. The Nine of Swords, these are two very unpleasant cards, the 9 and 10 of Swords. Always not fun to have in a reading. This one shows the warrior very much about to be killed by the other warriors or captured or something. In the Rider-Waite deck, this one is represented with it's the person who's sitting in their bed and the swords are all across them and the background is black, like they're being kept up at night by their night terrors. And so this is a little bit of a different representation of that. Again, this is a domination spell. And the Homer Oracle says, by her wailing, she rouses from sleep her household servants. I guess that's sort of an homage to the Rider-Waite version of the card, but also represents the fact that this card represents being sort of fearful of things that are perhaps going to happen to you. Not they haven't necessarily happened, and they may not happen, but they are things that are, keeping you up at night, worrying about it. So the final card, 10 of Swords. This is the card that in the Rider-Waite deck shows a person laid out with a bunch of swords in their back. In the Crowley deck, it's represented by a bunch of sort of smashed swords, and it's all red and orange and it says ruin at the bottom. It's always fun to have that card come up for a client who's asking about their love life. This card shows warriors. Instead of the Rider Waite deck where we only see the swords in the back of the person, here we see the warriors kind of walking away after having done it. This card always has a feeling to me, because the person has been stabbed in the back, of betrayal or being fearful that you're about to be betrayed, or be that your environment is hostile to you, that you're being conspired against, or so forth. So it's a card kind of a paranoia a little bit for me when it comes up in a reading. So this kind of shows that terrible conclusion that may be on the horizon for someone. And the spell is actually a destruction spell, and it's a fairly intense destruction spell that I would recommend not doing in the form that it was created. You basically catch a frog and you cut it open, and you stick this talisman inside it with a few other, all the bad things you want to have happen to your enemy. And then you say, like, as this frog dries and bleeds, let my enemy have the same thing happen to them, with some magical words as well. So it's a particularly intense spell, and see, it's another one of those demon guys, but he's holding some sort of head in, so it's very, very destructive. The Homer Oracle is speaking good things, but they were contriving evil things in their hearts. So that's all the cards and all the little tidbits of the cards. If you've ordered a book, most of what I've said is said in the book in one way or another about all of these things. I'm going to take a look at the questions. Oh, someone just said that's great. So no questions. So, basically, next week I'm going to get out the small cards again, and I'm going to kind of take a look at them with regard to the numbers themselves, comparing all the aces, comparing all the one, the twos, threes, fours. I might spread it out over 2 weeks. So I got to kind of keep these things short, both because it ends automatically after a short time, and then also because I have to pick up my daughter, which I need to do now. So if you guys don't have any questions, I'm going to just go ahead and say thank you for being here, and I will see you next week. And next week, I think that the 26th is like Friday of next week, so I still won't have the cards, but they will almost be here. And I will probably have another update for you, hopefully an update on the rest of the things that are supposed to go along with everything as well. So good night, thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week.